Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Afterlife podcast. This is your host, Pooja Chilakuri. I'm honored and excited to be here today with Father Nathan Castle. I met Father Nathan at a conference that we both attended. He was actually one of the speakers. And when I heard him speak and I realized that the work that he's doing, I really wanted to bring that to my audience. Today, I'm honored to have him. Father Nathan has helped more than 700 souls transition peacefully to the afterlife. These were people that died suddenly, violently, and traumatically. Father Nathan is quick to point out, though, that not everybody that dies violently and traumatically has their death or their passing interrupted. Father Nathan has written 3 books, and he has gifted me these books, and I have loved reading them. They're Afterlife Interrupted, Book 1 and 2, and then his take on the spirituality using the Wizard of Oz, and that is Toto 2, The Wizard of Oz as a Spiritual Adventure. Father Nathan is from Groves and received his MA and Master of Divinity degrees from the Dominican School of Philosophy at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. He served in campus ministries at the University of Arizona, University of California, Riverside, Arizona State University, and Stanford University. Father Nathan has also chaired the executive board of the Catholic Campus Ministry Association, and he's also the host of a podcast, The Joyful Friar, and he's here with us today. Thank you so much for coming on this show, Father Nathan.
So happy to be with you.
Yes, I am very, very curious. So I'm going to jump right into it. You talk about, in this show, we talk about NDEs, which are near death experiences. We talk about spiritually transformative experiences, but you have introduced me to something completely new to me, which is the interrupted death experience. And you've helped all these souls to cross over peacefully. Could you talk a little bit about how that came about and when you first realized that you were seeing dead people?
People who have died, they're still alive. They're
Oh, they're
alive.
still alive. Okay.
They're different. They're just alive differently
Yeah.
than you and I are. We'll
Yeah.
join them one day when it's time.
Yes.
But we won't be dead. We'll be persons who have died, but that doesn't make us dead. I coined the phrase interrupted death experience because I wanted for it to sit next to the near-death experience. I've been able to have Dr. Raymond Moody on my podcast, and I remember reading Life After Life in 1975 when it came out. I was in college and just found it fascinating. And so he coined the phrase near-death experience. But for people that are familiar with the classic pattern of a lot of NDEs, there are elements to it that, of course, these people only nearly died and didn't completely die, but they tell us of leaving the body, being aware that their consciousness is separate from the body that's on the operating table or in the automobile accident. They often have moved through a tunnel or toward an attractive light. Oftentimes they've met religious figures or family members who have preceded them. Sometimes they've had a life review. Sometimes they reluctantly are told to go back, that they've had more to do here. Other times they had the freedom to choose to go back. Anyway, there's these classic elements that are not always in every NDE, but many times they are. And I just wanted people to know that there's another kind of death where it all happened so abruptly that that process was interrupted, and their trauma became the issue of the moment rather than this movement through passageways and so on. So that's where reason I coined that phrase. The experience, I was raised, I'm 67 years old, and I was raised a Catholic Christian. And in my early childhood, we were taught about the continuity between this life and the next, if you want to call it that it's really all a continuum. That I had a family on earth and a family in heaven, that I spent most of the day with my family on earth, but before sleep, we talked to our family in heaven. I was taught to make the sign of the cross, as Catholic Christian children are, that it makes an X over the spot. And I loved a dinosaur. I mean, children often love dinosaurs. I love pirates. And my mom knew that. And she taught me that X marks the spot where the treasure is buried, which is in my heart. And if I wanted to talk to God who created me and loves me, all I needed to do was make an X and knock on the door and say, hello in there, I'd like to talk to you. And I also was taught that when people die, I was taught about heaven, hell, and purgatory, almost like Canada, the United States, and Mexico, like they were nation states with borders. That's and that that heaven was for, perfected people who could be in the face of God. Hell was for the opposite of that, but most people were not either one of those. They were mostly in the middle, and that we could help the people that died by praying for them at whatever they needed to do to get ready to be in the full-on presence of God. Our prayers could help them do that and sort of cross a border. So I was doing that very actively as a little child. Once I learned, in my childhood, we got newspapers in the morning and at night, twice a day, and both of them had obituary pages. So once I learned to read. I learned that only Catholic people believed in purgatory, and my town was like half evangelical Christian, Baptist mostly, and that they didn't believe that there was a purgatory. So I prayed for all of them. If I saw in the paper that somebody was going to be buried in a church that wasn't Catholic, I would pray for them because I figured their family wouldn't know to do that. So I would do it for them. So I was a really busy little kid making sure that purgatory had like prompt customer service, that anybody that was there was getting helped along because of my prayers.
Wow. So very early on, you had the heart for this work.
I did. Yeah, it just made sense. And both of my dad's siblings were Dominican nuns, first grade teachers. And it to them and both of my parents, especially my mother, I was surrounded by people that weren't only members of an organized religion, but were spiritual practitioners, people that were at home in their religious sense and practice. So that's how that all got started. It had roots all the way back to early childhood.
So how did that transition to actually being able to interact with these people whose death process was interrupted, so to speak?
Well, I knew that in the Catholic tradition, other traditions too, but the Catholic Christian one is the one I was raised and trained in, that there's a long history of active interaction between God and persons on earth, or between angels and persons on earth, or between human persons who had already died and people are still on the earth. That we had a really rich tradition of the mystical tradition, and we were introduced to that really early. I didn't know that would really manifest in my life until different things when I was 18, and then especially at 22 was the first time that God ever asked to borrow my voice to talk to someone else. I had to discern that. Is this the devil? Is this my own lunacy or whatever? That I chose to trust, and that gift manifested a couple of times in my early 20s. It stayed dormant for a long while, but then in my early to mid 40s, it manifested again in the form that's now like weekly, helping people that they only need to voice something for a short time. And I'm not curious. I'm not going seeking people. I only deal with the ones that come to me.
Yes.
And I don't do message giving. I don't do, I won't help you talk to your grandmother or anything like that. That's not my place. I'm a Catholic priest in good standing, and it's a fine line. There are people that are nervous about this kind of thing, and not without reason. But anyway, it's been a large part of my life.
Yes, and I want to talk about that as well. That is one of the questions I wrote down, because I do understand that in certain religious beliefs, having an experience where you're interacting with the other side, it can be hard because you could get pushed back and say that that's the devil or something like that. But after reading your book, Father Nathan, I'm convinced that's a beautiful work of the Holy Spirit in your life. And these souls, they come to you in your dreams, right?
They do. They normally come about once a week.
Yeah.
They It's not always the case. Sometimes they kind of cluster, or other times the Holy Spirit knows me through and through, and sometimes knows that I'm over busy and kind of leave the guy alone, let him get caught up or something. But normally about once a week. And I keep a journal on the nightstand to write down the dream, because dreams can dissolve pretty quickly. So I
Yes.
write them down as fast as I can. Uh, I normally schedule with prayer partners. The getting with prayer partners used to be in person only, but then the pandemic changed that because travel and being in the same room was dangerous. And so it works just fine on Zoom. And my prayer partners are in New York and Pennsylvania. I'm in Arizona. Some of them are in California. It works just fine over Zoom. And we always pray protectively first.
Yes.
I don't pick up hitchhikers on Earth or on any other plane. Uh,
Yeah.
Not everyone is good company. I believe everyone is well made in the image of God, but not everybody knows that or is behaving accordingly at the moment.
Yeah.
So it's like I didn't have children of my own, but having to teach children to be trusting and also to be aware of stranger danger.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
and so I pray to Michael the Archangel
Mm-hmm.
first, my own guardian.
Mm-hmm.
I ask for the persons of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. I call on Holy Mary, the Mother of Jesus, Saint Benedict, who's famous for being protective around the demonic.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't go on and on about it. We pray for a couple of minutes, and mostly it's inviting a kind of a sacred huddle. If you
Mm-hmm.
can imagine a football game,
Mm-hmm.
I make sure that we're surrounded on all sides by beings of light who are full of love and in the heart of God, and then we do our job.
And yeah. And Father Nathan, I've read so many of the stories that you talk about in the book, and I don't want to give it away because I actually really want people to read this book. And I'm just gonna put a warning there if you have readers or reading glasses and you're gonna cry like me, you're gonna need tissues to wipe those glasses because every story I read, I thought, oh, I'm not gonna cry in the next one. And I ended up crying because these souls are so beautiful. And
Let's
the
give me an
reason
example of one, if you don't mind me interviewing you on your show.
no, no, I
What's one
don't.
that you
So, two of my favorite stories from your book, Father Nathan, the ones that made me really cry, is one has to do with Ray, and he comes on pretty early on in the book. And another one is Shelley. I think she was a mom and she was dropping off her kids at school and she hit a kid. And
Yes.
that event made her get stuck. Like she couldn't move past that. She lived longer than that event, but when she was on the other side, it felt like that was her guilt, was that trauma loop that she was stuck in, and you helped her move along. And Ray's story really, really got to me because I think he was ready to go because his wife was about to die. And up
He
until
said he wanted to greet her when she comes, but I can't the way I am.
right, exactly. And so those two especially, but and then Dwight's story,
Yeah.
that one really. So there was, I can't tell you, there was not a single story that I didn't have tears. So it's not only because of the way they died, but how beautiful they are, and all they needed was a little help to,
Yeah.
yes. So thank you for the work you're doing.
They all they all end up in some sort of therapeutic first level because they need it. They went through trauma as they left here.
Hmm.
And it just made sense to me as time went on that if you or I were in a trauma, for example, on a freeway, there's a system there to handle things, even if we're incapable of doing it ourselves. We
Hmm.
might be unconscious and put on a stretcher and brought to an emergency room. And then maybe we heal to the point where we move to a private room or maybe to some sort of, I don't know, walk up and down the hall or whatnot. There becomes a point at which you don't need this anymore. And somebody, as like a social worker, helps you gather yourself and gather your things and help you out the door, making sure that somebody's coming for you, that you understand what's next, and
Yes.
that you re-engage your freedom. And
Mhm.
that's pretty much the work we do.
Yes. And Father Nathan, one thing that struck me from your book in all of these stories, the thing that was common is that someone did come for them, whether it was an angel or a spirit guide. In one case, it was Jesus, but they didn't come to you until they were ready. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like they could have moved on you know, but do you think when they're ready, their guides and angels bring them to you?
They do. I used to ask frequently, how did you find me? And very often we heard the same thing. I don't know, someone brought me here.
Uh-huh.
One time I heard your light was on. Um, After a while, we just quit asking because it didn't seem that important in the end. One lady compared it to catalog shopping. She died in the 1950s, and she lived. I can remember the J.C. Penney and the Sears catalog, great big thick books with lots of tiny print and pictures of clothing or things you might buy. And she just said, somebody sat me down with a catalog and said, just page through this and you'll find something that's to your liking. And she turned a page and saw me, and she was Catholic, and she said, oh, there's a Catholic priest that helps with this. I think I'll choose him.
Well, the good news is they all make it peacefully, so that's the good part.
And they have a lot of choices and options.
Yeah.
Sometimes say, well, what makes you so important or whatnot? Well, I don't know. I just make myself available, and the universe has got so many possibilities built into it that it's never only one, really. I think we always have lots of different ways that we could do the same thing.
Thing, yeah. And another thing that was in common that I found in these stories was when they're ready to move on, it's always because someone they can connect with through love that's already on the other side.
Yes.
Uh, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think the universe is made of love, that God is love, that God isn't just lovable or loving, that if you imagine God having, I don't believe God has component parts, but if God did, all of them would be love.
Yeah.
And and that God just is love, and that we're swimming in God's love all the time. And uh but people have specific experiences of being loved and trusting in somebody. And so very often it's someone they were close to. But surprisingly, um, when we think of love, we might think of parents and siblings and very close friends or grandparents. And but in a lot of cases, especially early on, it was someone in a public role, like a coach, a scout leader, a piano teacher,
Yeah.
another kid in your class.
Yeah.
They could be very incidental characters in the long story of your life, but when they were there, it was nothing but pleasant and safe and good. And so sometimes some little person will show up who wasn't very in your life very long, but when they were, their impact was positive and peaceful. So
Yes.
sometimes they'll show up.
And I am actually going to read a quote from your book with your permission, because this
Sure.
really helped me with that question that I just asked you. Um, you say that in your book, the whole experience is all about love, which brings me to a point that Catholic and other Christian readers might well wonder. Why would you bother asking for all these other relatives and school teachers to come and help a stuck soul? Why wouldn't you just ask Jesus? Well, I believe God is love, and that whoever has been the most loving person in your life has been the person who has most revealed the presence of God to you. And
Yeah.
when I read this, I cried. So thank you for reinforcing that through your words right now and through the book as well.
Well, the part of your audience that is familiar with Christian theology might know the phrase "the body of Christ."
Mm-hmm.
That St. Paul in the Christian New Testament speaks
Uh-huh.
very often about being an individual apart from other individuals, but also at the same time being a part of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And he calls it the body of the Christ, the body of the anointed. And so, uh, in I think it's the second book, there's a man who was a Christian pastor who died violently, who was murdered, and he had been helped by different people in the afterlife, and he said to one of them, "When am I going to get to see Jesus?" And he said they had to take me back to Christian preschool and remind me that he's in all of us, and that
Wow.
you've been seeing him in all of us.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to see the version of him in your imagination with the beard and the halo and the toga and the sandals, we'll get you ready for that.
Wow. Wow. And that's powerful. That's
Yeah,
powerful.
yeah.
It, it is. It is. We can't fathom that kind of love, and it's hard for our minds here to comprehend so many things, which also brings me to the next question, Father Nathan. A lot of these souls, after they transition, you actually ask them for their permission before you used their stories in your book. So when they return, they seem different, don't? And you talk about that, like it almost feels like they were doing things in the afterlife to heal and grow.
Yes.
I Can you comment on that a little bit?
Well, when we first imagined, I did this work for more than 15 years, 18 years, something like that, before conceiving the idea of actually writing a book about it. And when we did, I just thought, these stories are quite personal. And before I would tell them to other people, I think I should get permission. So that meant going back a second time. In fact, a friend of mine who had been a Christian clergywoman for a long time said, you keep saying that. They came to you once. They would probably come again if we asked them to. We're not trying to disturb their afterlife, and we're not up to no good. We're not trying to get the lottery numbers of tomorrow, or we're just being courteous. Let's try it. And
Yeah.
so we did. And that we're only asking a yes or no question. May I use your story in a book, or may I tell it publicly? And so that could be a one sentence answer, or one word, yes or no.
Mhm. Mhm.
But instead, we create a bond when we do this work.
Mhm.
And we're kind of back with an old friend. Even if it was only a brief encounter, it was a very powerful one, an intimate one. And so very often they give us a little update about what they've been doing. And um, so I record all of those, and I get them transcribed, and they become a Word document, and then they with a little bit of light editing, they make their way into a book.
Yeah, that's all. You just keep adding to your family on the other side
I do all the time.
all
Yeah,
the time. Yeah.
yeah.
And when I was reading your book, first my mind wanted to like I was like, what are these people doing in the afterlife? So, my brain went there where I wanted to connect some dots and I wanted to, well, what is it like? And then I actually remembered the words of St. Paul, and you're probably very familiar with this passage from the Bible, and I actually wrote it down because I feel like some things are always going to be a mystery. And my brain, I just want to try to figure things out. But some things, and here's what he says. He says, when I was a child, I talked and thought and reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put those childish ways behind me. For now, we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. So all of these stories and what they're doing on the other side, it brings me so much hope and comfort, but I do understand that we can't know it all.
Yes, and we've used a lot of Christian language, and you just quoted from Christian scripture. But the people that come are not necessarily Christian. They're not necessarily religious at all.
Yep.
Death is very ecumenical. People
Yes.
are dying every day, and they die from all, in violent accidental ways or whatever. And they so people will come to me, and they're not necessarily. They'll even sometimes tell me I wasn't religious, so
Yeah.
don't load me up with a lot of religious language.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but Jesus dealt with all kinds of people,
Yes.
and sometimes the religious ones were the ones that gave him the most trouble.
Yes.
Uh, Sometimes it was the least religious people that he had the easiest time with.
Yes. And I think that's another thing that in all these stories that has been very comforting for me personally is to see that they're from all kinds of backgrounds, but the love they receive on the other side, it's the same. It's
And as they grow and heal in their afterlife journey, that at least the parts of it they've let me see, my prayer partners and I see, um, they have to come to truth. And sometimes, in maybe some in your current audience, is there some way in which you have an idea that you're exaggerating to the point where it's no longer true? You,
hmm.
a lot of like dramatic stories that we tell ourselves start with some little germ of truth, that
Mhm.
nobody loves me or something like that,
Mhm.
but then we amplify it and make it so loud and all consuming that after a while it's really a lie. And
Mhm.
um, a lot of times people have sometimes they caused their death by careless driving,
Mhm.
or uh, because of something they did, other people died.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll have all kind of guilt around it that you can understand, but it still needs to be gotten over.
Yeah.
There.
So it's like forgiving ourselves.
Yes, contextualizing things and seeing that, for one thing, if we continue to exaggerate and sadden ourselves because of uh, grief stories that we tell ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
then we're not available to the next person in our life. All we have to give them is this kind of um, darker version of ourselves than we could
Mm-hmm.
if we would actually get over it and heal. We might then be able to actually give the world our best.
Yeah, absolutely. And Father Nathan, I just have actually one more question because
Okay.
we are talking about religion. So when I like I told you earlier, I grew up Hindu, became a Christian, and then I actually had a really difficult time with the institution I was with because of the fundamentalist doctrines that I was taught, which actually my relationship with God suffered. But thankfully I have moved beyond that. But I have a question for you because when I had my spiritually transformative experience, I was told that that was the angel of light, which is the devil. So, the work that you're doing, did you find skepticism or pushback from your, you know, uh, I don't know, your beliefs or your religious environment?
I anticipated it. I expected that that would be true. And, um, people are always free to believe or disbelieve what others
Mhm,
say.
mhm,
And all I can do is say my truth simply
mhm,
and try to explain questions well. Um, sometimes Christian people can be quick to assume that any kind of interaction between the spirits and ourselves is of the devil across the board in a very
mhm,
sweeping way.
mhm.
And I wasn't raised that way. I was raised to make more distinctions than that. And um, so recently, a Catholic apologist named Jimmy Akin has changed my life by using his knowledge of both testaments of the Bible and the Catholic Catechism and the Catholic tradition to say that the word that comes up often is necromancy,
Yes.
um, which involves speaking to the dead for gain of some kind, to gain
Mm,
esoteric knowledge or some sort of advantage.
mhm.
Uh, and he explained that that's not what Father Nathan is doing. Uh, it just isn't. And
It
so,
isn't. Yeah, that's very
it,
different.
and and then I don't know if you're going to follow Jesus, he's Jesus the crucified and risen one. You're
Mhm.
going to get detractors. You're going to have people that are going to disagree with you, and some of them might do it in ways that are really unkind or even cruel.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I've been spared a lot of that. But if it should come my way, I would try to deal with that as kind of a big boy.
Yeah.
Just say, I
Yes.
understood that following Jesus could cause me trouble,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so what?
And I know I heard someone say this once, and I've internalized it. If I'm going to be making errors, I would rather do that on the side of love. So it's,
Yes, and there in the Christian scriptures, there's several times when Jesus tells stories about people having various amounts of money or talents, and
mhm,
they invest them
mhm,
and get a return on investment. And the gifts are given so that they're used to the benefit of others.
yeah,
But in his stories, very often someone will have a gift or talent and they hide it or bury it for out of fear that they would misuse it. And
mhm.
then they say in the story, "Here, you can have your gift back." And those are the ones that get scolded in the story. What was the point of giving you a gift if you didn't use it?
You didn't use
So
it. Yeah.
so anyway, I just have tried to be prudent and and say yes to this particular gift. And by the way, it's not the only thing I do. Uh, you know, it's not as though I'm in this kind of ozone layer of talking to people who've died all the time. I'm going about my life doing lots of other things that priests and people do. It's just
Yeah.
that this part lands in a book and
Yeah.
gets me on a podcast.
And it's and speaking of other things you're doing, this is my last question. You have a podcast.
I do.
Can you talk a little bit about what that's about?
Thank you for asking. It's called The Joyful Friar. I'm wearing my Dominican habit,
All
and
right.
the Franciscans and Dominicans are two who are. Friar is just from the word frere, which means brother.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a brother in a religious family called the Dominicans. Saint Dominic, our founder, his nickname was the Joyful Friar.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the reason I joined this group and not another one, because I was attracted to joy. The gospel is full of joy.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is full of joy. So my show is called the Joyful Friar. I have on different guests that have some acquaintance with the near-death experience
Mm-hmm.
or interest in afterlife and healing and truth and goodness. And then other times I just take stories that are in my books and break them down and drill down deeper into what I call compassionate response to the stories and spiritual practice resulting from. And I'm aware that lots of people don't have a congregational life of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
If they're affiliated with any world religion, a lot of people have only a vague
Mm-hmm.
sense of it and
Mm-hmm.
not a community that they can rely on. And that's the word religion is from the word rely.
Mm-hmm.
And many people don't have a community they can rely on. And then during the pandemic, even people who did found that their house of worship was shuttered. And so as a lot of people have gotten more comfortable with going online and not feeling like they're going to break the internet if they touch it, people are looking for spiritual answers to questions online. And so I felt like it was important to have an online presence and try to be available to people.
Thank you so much, Father Nathan. I'm taking your time speaking to us today. I would love to continue this conversation forever. And those of you who want to learn more about Father Nathan's work, I'll have all his links to his books and to his podcast. And I believe on your podcast, you also answer some questions that people have after they read your book. So
I do, but one thing that I do ask is if they go to my website and use the little email on
mhm.
there, they fill out a bit of a form. And I ask them not to ask me questions about my book without having read the first one. There's
Gotcha.
just enough hours in the day to explain things I've already
No,
explained.
you're doing a lot.
Yeah.
I know that. So
Well,
thank
I just ask that they read it, and if they don't like to read, they can listen to the audio
Mhm.
version on. They're all on Amazon, and they're ebooks, paper
Yeah,
books, or audibles. And I voice them with my prayer partners.
yeah,
So, and people can do that in their commute or when they're walking the dog or
yeah.
whatever. Even if they're not readers, they can listen. So
Thank
anyway, I ask that they do that, and then I don't bring messages through from your deceased ones. I don't do that.
you.
Uh, but I might be able to help with something that's going on in someone's life.
Got it. And I'll make sure that all of the links are there in the show notes. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Father Nathan. I really appreciate it.
It was great to be with you today. God bless you.
Me too.